Hey everyone, thanks for joining my channel tonight. For those of you who haven't been here before, my name is Doug, and my cat just jumped off my lap and knocked my camera around, so we're definitely live. So feel free to subscribe to the channel and also like the channel. That would be really appreciated. And what we'll be going through tonight is a few different techniques I like to use for some of my art styles. I'll be working on one of Baby Yoda. I'm going to be using some charcoal, excuse me, for that. And then also I'm going to work on a crow and kind of use some interesting techniques for ink and some splatter there to kind of get that laid out in a more loose and fun way. And also I'm going to keep working on a piece that's a commission of kind of a scenery, and I'm going to be showing how I would layer in wildflowers and butterflies into the foreground. So a few different things we're going to work with, so a few different techniques, so feel free to follow along and have some patience as I transition between the pieces, and we'll have a hangout session here in the studio. So I don't know if many of you are watching or following The Mandalorian, but I find it's a pretty great show, and season 2 just recently started, so I've been getting caught up on that this past week, and I always get a kick out of the child and his antics he gets up to and all the stuff he's not supposed to be doing that he's doing, and how he gets reprimanded for it. So I don't know if you watched the episode the other week, but he was getting into some transport that he and the Mandalorian were getting to a safe place. So the character who had her eggs in a gestation period to get to her husband to fertilize the eggs on another moon location, he got a little snacky when he saw them, so he got in trouble for that. So for what I'm doing with the charcoal right now is just kind of hammering in where things would go, getting my outlines and placement of things. So work here with his big eyes a little bit. They're going to be some of the darkest spots for him in this particular piece. I'm just gonna actually use a bigger piece to fill in the background a bit quicker. That's a good thing about using the edge of the charcoal, because it actually just gives you a lot of, technically like a much wider brush to work with than you would if you just were using the end of it. So as you'll see too, some of what's already on the board behind it is actually coming through in a bit of the tracing, so it kind of gives it an extra texture, but I'm quite liking that it's giving it some extra depth. It reminds me of when I was a kid and I used to trace pennies or nickels with a pencil. So I want to make sure that the areas that are really bright for him stay that way. So I'm not going to go in where the highlights really are, like here on his head. I want to leave those as they are. I kind of just want to focus on where the shadows will be. So it's interesting too with the timeline of this show, because initially I was wondering if this was actually Baby Yoda, but based from what I'm learning from the show, this is happening much later. So it's kind of interesting to find out more about this species of character. So I've actually taken a scene from the show where he's about to eat one of these eggs that he's not supposed to. Kind of interesting too, the character of the Mandalorian, the actor that plays him. Really liked him in Narcos, and but also like Game of Thrones, and I think it was the characters was Prince Oberon. And it's kind of funny, I found out that the way he got that role in Game of Thrones was he was teaching someone acting lessons, and they were going for that particular role, and then he went in and took it out from underneath them. Just want to make sure I get the right shape of the eye here. So in this container is what the eggs were being transported in. Which I did have some issues with, because I don't know why she needed to carry her eggs in a pot, and then she took them swimming, and it's kind of weird. So now I pretty much have the placement of where I want everything. I'll work on his hand a little bit here, actually. And I'll go in and add a bit more shadow and highlight to pump out some of these details. Cool, it's feeling pretty good. So his eyes aren't strictly just all black. There's varying tones in there and highlights too, so I want to make sure I give those the proper attention. It just gives more depth to the actual drawing. You kind of want to make sure too that the placement of the highlights are consistent on both eyes, otherwise he may look a little cross-eyed. So I want to give a bigger arch up here because he's pretty damned excited about these eggs. So his shadows cast quite a bit of, or sorry, his ears cast quite a shadow. So I'm gonna make sure to put that in there as well. I'll work on these mid-tones here a bit. Just gonna break this piece off just so I can have a different size amount of charcoal I can put against there. As I mentioned, it's kind of like a brush that way, so. So it's feeling pretty good there. So just to make sure heat pops on the paper, I want to really darken in what's around them. It's a little hard in the hand sometimes. Get a little cramped. There's more of these little eggs in here too, so I want to draw some of those in. So just kind of want to smudge this around a bit, get a bit more mid-tone in there. Make sure the highlights stay as such. Give a little more detail here to his robe that he's wearing. Charcoal is a good medium just to play around with, literally. Just kind of fill in those gaps. There you have Baby Yoda as figure drawing. If he is Baby Yoda, I guess it's a child essentially, but yeah, it's fun to play around with. I haven't drawn this character before, so it was pretty cool to make a mess with it. So let's get this down and set it aside. There you go. So another medium I like to work with a lot, aside from charcoal, is ink. I think it's pretty fun, and I really like just how gestural it can be and playful. It's not as loose and free as paint, because the brush is quite defining at times, but I really like how what I like to call happy mistakes kind of happen with it, and you can work that in the same way with charcoal too. You can play with your fingers a bit and kind of get it going. So what I want to work on tonight is, since I'm working with ink, I thought I'd draw acrylic and kind of play with there and kind of mess about with it. And these pens are pretty awesome because they have a brush bristle built in. It's gonna really kind of get some different textures pretty quick and get it down. Kind of figure out your placement of everything. So for me, a lot of the detail is going to be mainly in the beak. As that's generally the defining feature for a crow. And the eye. And the reference picture I took, I really liked because it kind of seemed like he wasn't too happy. So I'm kind of just pulling in the different brush strokes and working over and over, just to kind of build those feather textures up. So now that I have kind of the bigger areas mapped out for me, I'm going to go in with a smaller water-based paint marker to kind of mark in some of these details. Some of these feathers are pretty ratty and kind of doing their own thing, so give a bit more definition to the talons and the claws as well. It's kind of a style I've developed where I kind of like quite aggressive lines sometimes. But I don't want them to be too defined. They kind of more give the impression of the shapes. That way the viewer can fill in the gaps on their own. So what I'm doing with this one too, where there's using paint with the ink to kind of get that flow going. There's different blacks being used here as well, so it'll help give a bit of that definition between the texture of highlights and lowlights, because it's difficult to do with something that's generally black unless you're working with a lot of gray, so this kind of helps play with that. So this again is a bigger brush version of what I was just using, but you still get some really fun kind of marks with this. So now I kind of have the shape in there. I want to balance this out a bit. So I could, you know, kind of work in some things in the background. It doesn't have to be too descriptive. That's kind of what I like about this technique and approach. And just where I have such a heavy dark space in this area, I kind of want to offset it a bit in this corner. I'm going to blend that background in a bit more too with the actual crow. Cool. So sometimes when I'm playing around with ink and trying to figure out kind of design and placement of where I want things on a page or a canvas, I'll take this technique and really kind of play with it, have a bit of fun, and just kind of see what comes of it. So if you have any comments or feedback, I think it'd be great to hear. Let's catch on the light a bit there. There you go. So I'm going to switch gears here a bit and switch to acrylic. So I'm going to pull up my work in progress that I've been building and working towards. Hey, buds. And then I'm going to put my palette together and then start working on adding in the wildflowers and some butterflies to that too, and kind of show the techniques I use with my brushes to get those base layers down. So this is the first time you've been seeing this particular piece. I've worked on it a bit. It's a Arches paper with acrylic wash to this point. Really wanted to have a bit of a watercolor feel to it and kind of just block in the areas of where the details will go. So this is actually a salt marsh with a crick in it, and then a little more detail here with some salt ponds here. In the foreground here is where I want to start putting in the wildflowers and the butterflies kind of interspersed amongst it. So be quite a few layers and steps to this particular painting over time. So this was phase one with the background, and then phase two I'm going to place where I want those details to be. Oh, thanks, Jeff. Do you have a lot of crows down your way? So if you can't see what I'm doing, I'm actually just putting some paint here on my palettes. I'm envisioning quite a variety, I guess, of wildflowers in this one. In terms of color, a bit of variance. I'm feeling, just based on what's going on in the background. Let me bring this over. That I'll probably use more like purples, blues, and yellows. Normally when I work this way, I would have the pallets set up prior, but just where I was doing some other techniques, I didn't want the paint to dry out. So you have a really good relationship with the crows, it would seem. So as you can see here, I've just put a little bit of paint on my canvas, or palette, sorry. So I'll be using this to kind of blend and then work in the flowers as kind of suits me, I guess. So for reference, I did a Google search for New Brunswick wildflowers, which is where this is located, this spot. So I'm going to start with some lupins. Just going to work dark to light in this case. And they tend to grow in bunches, so I'll kind of put a lot of them here. I don't imagine you are a Moira Rose. What was the name of her movie? So once I get a few of these in here, I'll just start adding in different tones to build that shape out for these. So next I just want to pull in a bit of white, kind of mix that in, just give some variance. Just want to be really loose with this too and kind of keep building these up. They'll get lighter as they go taller, so. The Crows have eyes 3, the crowing. Croning. Thank you for that. Well, maybe we can get Catherine O'Hara to sign that drawing I just did, and then you know, do an auction or something. Raise some money for crows or whoever needs it. Do you think they'll have another comeback of Schitt's Creek in the future? Thanks. So I was asked earlier today too about how do I know when to stop a painting, and I think it's important to not feel you have to rush through and finish on the day you started, or whatever the case may be. That may be different though, you know, if you're working on a commission piece and you have a tight deadline. I totally understand pushing through. But in those instances, I would suggest really figuring out what tactics and process you're going to do in your head and kind of run through it a few times and then execute it almost as if it's already been done. However, if you have the luxury of time to kind of take your time, I think it's always really good to just walk away from it for a bit, come back to it and kind of see how it feels. I find the artwork will tell you after you've kind of have a fresh set of eyes what it needs or is missing, whether that's just a pop of color or just a bit more shade or shadow, and you'll get to that end result much quicker because you'll have fresher eyes and you won't be kind of tired physically or mentally kind of looking at it. So there's the lupins kind of put into place. I'm going to put in a little more of a deeper purple as well up in these upper parts where I've already lightened it up a bit. And again, I'm not being super precious on the detail. I kind of like, in this instance, for these things to be more whimsical and alive and kind of feel like there's some motion to them. Just kind of, for me, makes it more interesting because then your eye tells the story as opposed to some artwork that tells you exactly what's going on, and maybe that's sometimes a little less interesting. Cool. So from there, I'm going to kind of work more interspersed here with some honestly, I don't know the name of flowers. I'm just looking at some reference, so I'm going to go into some of these bluer flowers. Again, I just want to use this darker purple to kind of get the shape in. And I tend to use kind of 3 tones when I'm doing things. Kind of a dark, a medium, and a light. And then I'll use kind of white to highlight certain areas to kind of change those tones as well. That way you can just build it up a bit. These don't all need to be separated. They can be combined across. Since they are wildflowers, they wouldn't be just in certain areas. They'd be kind of blown all over. So now that I've got the shadows in place, I'm going to go in with a bit of a lighter blue. So I'll just mix in the white with that. So you can kind of see there the darker purple kind of automatically creates that shadow for me. So now I want to use a sparingly light blue to kind of pop the highlights of this. It's nothing too much. Just enough to add a bit of interest. All right. So now that I have my blue flowers in there, I'm going to switch over to the pinks and reds, and then go in with the yellows and oranges after that. So these pink ones are quite a bit of a different shape. So I want to make sure that that looks very different than the other ones I've placed in. They're kind of like 3 or 4 round petals kind of come together. I want to save room over here too, so I can put in some of the yellow flowers close to the lupins, because that way they'll be complementary, and having complementary colors next to each other causes a bit of dissonance, but it also kind of has them draw your eye into that area as well. What's great about doing, I find, for flowers and whatnot is, the thing about nature is it's no rhyme or reason. It doesn't have to be any specific way, it can kind of be however it turns out. So I'm just going to add a bit of white to some of these. Just to give some variance. And try to add that to the center pieces, because that's where they come together and tend to be a bit lighter. But also the petals too, a few of them. So I'm going to switch my brushes up for the yellow flowers. They have a bit more of a detail to them, in the sense that they're kind of round with a lot of like little petals coming off, so I'm going to use a flat brush for this particular one. Going in with like a golden yellow just for that deep, darker version of the colors that'll be in play. Also too, I'm going to use more of the yellow flowers over on this side to kind of also counterbalance off the lupins that are on the far left. Just going a little bit of the yellow, lighten that up. Thanks, Dan. So vocal tonight. So again, I'm just letting the brush find its way and kind of play with the highlights. So once all these flowers dry, I'll go in later and add more detail with greens and browns to kind of add in the stems and kind of how that's going to play up. Right now it all feels very much like it's floating, and that at this stage is intentional, but I would go back later and at another time and kind of build that in so it feels more anchored and more weighted to the actual paper. So I'm just going to clean this brush up. And the next thing I want to work on is the butterflies and their kind of shape. So I'm just going to add a few more colors of paint to my palette. And then I'll start working on those. So some of the main flowers in this particular area are monarchs. So I'm gonna start with some of those. And at this stage where they have like a really kind of black outline, I'll probably go in with like ink later and sort that out. But as far as for today's stage, I kind of want to get their wing shape and color of the back in place. So that'll be more of the oranges and yellows at this stage. So to start, I just want to play with 3 monarchs and kind of see how that's feeling. Hey, bud. So at this stage, it won't feel very detailed, and it's not intended to be. It's just really kind of filling in that back layer and bringing it forward with the other layers that'll come. So next I want to work on a few yellow ones. Again, I'm just using the 3 different types of yellow just to kind of give some variance, and then I'll place in the white. So I just want to add one bluish one, and then that'll get that to dry out, and then come back at another time and finish up what the details are going to be with the blacks and whites and a bit more of the tonal shades. Trying to figure out placement and where I'd like them to be. All right, so what I've worked on tonight, I've built in some flowers just very loosely, kind of with a lot of playfulness and motion. So we have some lupins over here, some blue flowers here, some pink ones, some yellow. I'll work in, as I mentioned before, some of the base for that, the stems and whatnot, and then just put in the placements of some of these butterflies. So these three will be monarchs with the orange wings as a background, a couple yellow ones and one kind of blue one, just to kind of spread out the color here in the foreground and kind of play with that. So yeah, it's coming together pretty fun actually. I'm liking the looseness and the playfulness to it. So yeah, to recap, we've kind of did a charcoal drawing of baby Yoda. We did an ink splatter kind of fun approach to drawing crows, and then we worked on this piece with the acrylic paints to bring the foreground to life a bit more. So yeah, thanks for hanging out, and hope you all have a great evening, and if you like what you saw, feel free to like the video. Ah, you did miss the Yoda. Where is Yoda? Yoda's not far. Not far at all. So I don't know if you watched the latest episode here. Is my camera? There we go. So he was stealing some eggs in the last episode, so that's what that's from. And then I'll show you the crow too. There you go. All right, thanks everyone, and have a great evening.